Today, a conversation with Edwin Almeida, breaking with tradition. Hello again, it's Martin North from Digital Finance Analytics. Welcome to our latest post covering finance and property news with a distinctively Australian flavour. And I'm joined again by our property insider, Edwin Almeida. Hello, Edwin.
Hello, Martin. Good to be here again and discuss. I'm sure you're going to have some interesting questions for me.
Yes, well, I think there's a really interesting conversation to be had about the way that agency agreements are structured. In other words, the real estate agents who basically are selling your property for a vendor, because there's a whole bunch of stuff below the waterline that people probably aren't aware of, right?
That's correct, Martin. And I guess with the changes in the property downturn, obviously a lot of people don't realise how susceptible they are in actually paying double commissions, which I'm sure we'll discuss this in detail later on. So yeah, there are a lot of changes that agents themselves aren't even aware of what is going to happen, what is going to occur, because a lot of agents that have come into the property arena in the last, say, 7-8 years don't really know what happened in the early 2000s where with similar situations. And obviously you've got to be on the ball, and most agents unfortunately aren't on the ball.
Okay. Well, let's start then with the question of duration. So what's the typical duration of an agency agreement?
Well, the traditional duration of an agency agreement, an exclusive agency agreement, is 90 days or 3 months. Again, it's a traditional format, and we're breaking with traditions. And I think vendors have got a very good opportunity to use that in their favour if they want to make sure that the agent works a lot harder. So when I say that, I mean by reduce the agency period, reduce it to 8 weeks as opposed to 12 weeks, reduce it to 6 weeks. If the agent is giving you all these notions of how high a price they're going to achieve, the highball the property, or the what we call in the industry where they're trying to buy the listing or overquoting on the property, well, then to later on put pressure on you to sell the property at a lesser amount, which is a typical strategy of the industry, unfortunately. Well, then say, okay, if you can get me all that, I'll give you the agency agreement. Let's not go for 3 months. Let's go for 2 months. Because if I don't like your services, if I don't like the way you perform, why should I be confined, or why should I be boxed in to a 3-month contract? So dictate your terms. I think it's a great time and opportunity for vendors to start dictating terms on agents.
Right. So the typical agreement, which is, the form that they put in front of you, will say 90 days. But what you do, just strike it out and say, no, you can have it for 60 days.
No, the typical agreement usually has, there are a couple of slots where you put in the time of commencement to the time of completion. And obviously there are notice periods to terminate the agency agreement, which a lot of vendors, again, don't do. And agents don't advise vendors on how to do it. And let me add this, Martin. In light of that is where we end up with vendors having to pay two commissions as opposed to just the one, because one agent has been working with a potential buyer. The agency agreement is supposedly mutually terminated by both parties, but there's a continuation clause, and there are also other clauses behind our legislation that the first agent has, you could say, has a right over the purchaser if that is the purchaser that ends up buying the property, if they inspected the property whilst in the carriage of the first agent. So unless the agency agreements are terminated properly, the vendors could be liable for two commissions. I've just terminated an agency agreement for a client of mine that wasn't very happy with the local agent. It still had 7 weeks to run, and we've come to an agreement. I helped my client come to an agreement with the agent that had carriage of the property to terminate it early on certain provisos. Basically, he stuffed up big time, and I made him aware of it. and I was able to get my client out of it because of deficiencies in the way he executed the agency agreement. But it wasn't just enough for him to say, yes, the agency agreement is terminated, mutually terminated, but we also got a deed of agreement to indemnify the vendor should any of the parties that inspected the property whilst he had carriage of that sale he wasn't able to claim on a commission.
Right. So what you're saying is, firstly, go for a shorter duration rather than the longer duration. And secondly, you want to have a very clear termination point so that you don't get to the point where you suddenly find that there are two claims for the commission if the property is subsequently sold.
Exactly. And look, you've got to ask yourself the question, why is it 3 months? And it's typically because most agents just hold one open house on a particular Saturday when every other agent is holding it. Make them work for the bloody commission. That's what I'd say. I did a breakdown of what agents have been earning, and I've posted on Property Observer that breakdown in other forums, and it comes down to agents have been earning $1,246 per hour on average when you break the commissions down, and that's based on a per hour that they've worked on your property. Oh yeah, they give you all the fairy floss on top of that. So oh yeah, but you're paying for the expertise of the negotiation process. Yeah, well, this is where you're going to be paying for the expertise when the market's turned. The last 5 years, vendors were just throwing money at agents, and agents were just gladly taking it on board without doing much for it.
Right. So it's critical to have a termination agreement and also some sort of indemnity to make sure that you don't fall into this double commission trap, right?
Yeah, and make them work for it in those 8 weeks, whatever the term is. 8 weeks is reasonable. I think 2 months is a reasonable period of time, especially if the agent that's going to take carriage of the sale of your property is making you all sorts of illusionary promises, and make them work for it. It's not good enough just to have one open house during the week and expect buyers to parachute in from 3,000 feet above sea level, dropped in by helicopters or whatever they think that the buyers are going to come in by. Work for it. Work for the bloody thing. Have opens during the week if you can. Have opens on a Saturday. Have opens on a Sunday. I'm baffled by how the majority, and I'd say 99.9% of agencies do not have opens on a Sunday, given the fact that Saturday is another working day. Saturday is perhaps the busiest days for families at the moment.
Sure. Okay. Very good advice there. Okay. Let me switch on to then something else, because the other thing, of course, that comes up is this concept of vendor paid advertising, right? So basically, as well as the commission that you get if there's a sale, that most agreements will say you, the vendor, will actually pay for a whole bunch of additional advertising costs too, which I frankly have never fully understood. Why is it that vendors are being basically double dipped?
Well, do you want my short story on that, or do you want the long version?
Well, give me the short one first. Give me the short one first.
Go on. Between the eyes.
Yeah, go on. Give us the short version.
My version, because he was sanctioned by higher up and not controlled. When I say higher up, it's being sanctioned by the institutes, by the real estate institutes. It's another form of income that the agents have duplessly have extracted from the vendors, illegally extracted from the vendors, conned the vendors into giving it to them with all this promissory and illusionary achievements of what they were going to do, when in actual fact most of the vendor paid advertising that vendors have paid have been to increase the profile of the agent or the agency rather than their property. Look, and I say this, I'm not totally against vendor paid advertising, but I am against 150% against the fact that most agents do not place the vendor paid advertising or the marketing fee that they charge upfront, which is also questionable. They don't place it in the trust account where it should, and they don't give their vendors an itemized account or invoice at the end of the sale. Why? Because I can assure you and I can guarantee you, Martin, that most of that money goes through the general account as opposed to the trust account. And again, sanctioned by the real estate institutes. They all beat their chest. They all have these seminars, go out there and teach agents how to get more money from vendors, and let's do less. Let's come up with platforms. Let's come up with ways of working less for the vendor. So, why not do the opposite? Why not joint venture with the vendor and actually show them that you're going to put your money where your mouth is? In other words, if you don't sell the property for what you tell them you're going to sell it for, or within reason, within those reasonable grounds that you've set in place to form the agency agreement that they've signed, and you've instructed the vendor, why not say, and by the way, I am going to put my money where my mouth is, and I'm going to pay for the advertising and the marketing campaign up front, and we will settle that at the end. Why don't they do that, Martin? Because they're too bloody lazy, they're too cocky, and they have been for the last 5 to 6 years.
Okay, so what you're saying is that vendor paid advertising fee that's paid right up front goes into the general running costs of the real estate business rather than dedicated advertising, right? Firstly,
exactly.
And secondly, as it's an additional source of income, it's not then linked to any incentivized activity from the point of view of the agent. So effectively, it's just another flow coming into the business, and you don't necessarily get value from that flow.
No, you don't. And this morning I read an article of my good old mate, Mr. Tarby from Century 21, condemning the fixed price officers that are out there, saying that if you pay less, you get the agents are incentivized a lot less. Well, you know what? That's questionable, and that perhaps is a discussion for another day. But just because you're going to throw money at an agent, or the agent dubious takes money from you, doesn't mean that he's going to work harder. As a matter of fact, hey, if they don't sell the property, you've already given them $5,000 or $10,000 up front. So what did they care to get an extra $5,000 or $10,000 on the other end? Because don't forget, the commission is shared with the office, with the head office, and the selling and listing agents. So if you get money on the way through, you're not really incentivized, are you? But if you've got money invested yourself in that venture, well, then you're going to work a lot damn harder to keep that listing and not lose it.
Right, and I was very concerned about your other comment, which was that many times that money just goes into the general accounts rather than a trust account, right? So basically, if for any reason the estate agency fell over through the process, then you can't get any of that money back, because essentially it is actually not earmarked directly to the client. It's actually just into general reserves, as it were.
Well, as a matter of fact, Martin, most don't know that they can claim it back. Most vendors don't know. How many auction campaigns are failed in the last year? On average, 150 got sold on the day, but yet there were 750 on average, week in, week out, that were taken to auction. Failed programs, failed marketing programs, failed auction campaigns, pushing vendors to accept less of a price than what they got told they were going to sell, but why is there a push from the agents? Because of the VPA. Now, let me put this, and let me say this to your followers, Martin. You've got every legal right on your side to claim for any money that you've paid the agent up front. If they do not provide a trust account receipt and it's itemized, you can take them to task and you can get all your money back, or most, if not all, your money back. Again, let me say this to you. In the last 3 months, I've taken 3 major or franchise groups, not so much groups, but offices to task on that, and I have claimed up to 75% back of what my clients have paid upfront in upfront fees, and because of the deficiency in the contract, because it's illegal. What they're doing is blatantly illegal, but yet it's sanctioned from higher authorities.
Okay, so the key message there for our viewers is, don't assume that if you've paid that money across and you don't get the service that you expect, you still have a right of recourse. You still have a right, effectively, to demand some of that back if it's unsuccessful.
Yeah, of course you do. And you've also got a right to claim back if the agent's told you that they're going to sell your property for $1.5 million. And they've told you that the strategy is going to be through by way of auction, and they've not justified how they've come to the conclusion, or how they've come to the assessment of the guide of the 1.5 that they're telling you they're going to achieve. If they haven't done all that homework, and then at the end of the day, when they take it to auction, or it's a dismal failure of a campaign, because there's nothing different about your property than all the other 10 properties that got sold in the street. They were all built by Marston Homes, A.B. Jennings, whoever built them. They're all the same bloody same. But yet, he's told you that yours is so unique that you've got to go to auction. You've got to pay them $10,000 up front, and the commission 2%, blah blah blah. You can, and then they've come back. Oh yeah, but the market's dictating that you should accept the 1.3, or what they say is they condition you, or others say, look, they crunch the vendor early in the first open or the second open and say, well, you know what, the market's really changed in these 2 weeks, and it's no longer 1.5, Mrs. Jones, it's now 1.4, and next week it'll be 1.3. Well, you know what, you've got recourse to claim the marketing fee, you've got recourse to claim the commission that's paid to the agent on the sale, and you've also got legal recourse to claim for the difference in the market appraisal that they gave you to the difference that the property got sold at. And watch this space, Martin, and watch when vendors wake up to this, especially as the market is turning, when agents start buying listings and quoting high just to get a listing. Watch how many agents are going to be in hot water with vendors because of that same reason. It happened before in the last property downturn, and it's going to happen again. And this time it's even going to be more obvious because the prices are a lot higher, and quite frankly, people are not just losing $10,000, $20,000, $30,000 in the price guides; they're losing hundreds of thousands of dollars in the price guides.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we're both, I think, expecting prices to slide further. But the point you also made there, you started touching on auctions, and of course, it seems to me that up until quite recently, basically, an auction was sold to a potential vendor as the only way to sell your property. So why is it that auctions were favoured, and to what extent is that still true?
Yeah, this auction, it's interesting, as you and I have discussed this topic before. When you look at the actual auctions listings that go to auction, on average 750 last year, week in, week out, but yet the amount of open for inspections on the same Saturdays, it generally runs around 16,000, 17,000, if you recall those figures, Martin. So, but yet it's a big push. Main reason being is because it's an easier form, it's an easier tool or tactic that agents use to extract the vendor paid advertising. It's an easier sell for them. Secondly, it's also because when the market was hot, agents didn't hang around for the best price. They basically almost gave carriage of that of achieving the best price to the auctioneer on the day, which, by the way, 9 out of 10 auctioneers don't even visit the home before the day of the auction, which is another concern, huge concern that vendors should have. Somebody taking carriage of the sale of your property when they just turned up 15 minutes before the auction, and all they're thinking about is how the hell am I going to go from one end of one end of the inner west, from Dully Chill. How the hell am I going to go from Dully Chill, let's say, to Ashfield and get there on time with all this traffic? That's what's going through their mind. That's what's occupying 50, 60, 70% of the mind, not achieving the best price. Come on, let's get real. So therefore, the agents saw this because the market was going high, and an easier and quicker way to also achieve a sale, which means the property stayed on the market a lot less, which meant that the agent got paid a lot quicker. Happy days, except for the vendors, because a lot of vendors lost out big time. You talk to some of the traditional players in this arena and ask them the question, what properties should really be taken to market? That is the question. Granted that some properties can achieve a great value, but it's still questionable. Could they have achieved an even greater value if it was done through what you would call a silent auction campaign or by tender or any of those other methods, traditional methods that, in my view, from my own personal experience, and again, in taking reporters to various properties that I myself have listed and sold in the past by way of private treaty after failed auction campaigns and achieved a higher price, and it's proven. I mean, there are a number of big names out there that would say the same, Martin.
Right. So there are points then when an auction perhaps isn't the right way to go, but there are some types of sales where an auction is required, right?
That's correct.
So I'm thinking, if there's, for example, a court order, for example, or
that's correct.
So what are the other example where
so you got a court order, and when you genuinely can't. So you've got a court order, so an inheritance or a family dispute of some sort of a dispute.
Yep.
Development sites are another one, like properties that have got potential for development. But then again, I've also made a point that in some cases, even development sites can achieve a greater value by having a silent auction or a sale by tender and otherwise. Now, the other one, of course, is if the property really is so unique that you can't really pinpoint it, and it's got some great attributes about it that you can generate a lot of interest. Send an editorial to the local newspaper, get attraction that way because it is unique. It's there's some sort of history attached to it. There's some sort of finesse about the property, but not when every single bloody apartment and home has been built by the same developer and for the last 10 years. They're just some of the ones that come to mind.
Okay, so basically what you're saying is don't get bounced into going through an auction. And remember, of course, that in that auction scenario, quite often the vendor themselves is put under a lot of pressure, exactly, isn't it, to try and actually take the deal on the day, right? So sometimes they sort of get bounced into the whole thing. Think about the alternative. As you say, there are other ways of actually taking the property to market, and sometimes they're better.
That's a pressure that agents. The tactic is not to put pressure on the buyers to pay more. The tactic is the majority in the main part is to put pressure on the vendor, because the vendor is thinking, crap, I've just paid $5,000, $10,000, $15,000, in some cases $25,000, even $30,000 in upfront marketing fees, and this is it. This is reality. This is what they're being conned into. This reality. Let's face it. People are staying away from auctions. They have been for a number of years now. The ones that paid the most stay away from auctions because they don't buy. They don't want to pay. They don't want to buy on emotion. They want to buy on greater factors than emotion. But agents prey on emotion, on the emotion of the buyers and on the emotion of the vendors in order to achieve a successful sale. So it's not really looking after the interest of the vendor as much as it is looking at the better interest of their pockets. Now, if you take that ingredient of emotion out, which is what we've got now, let's see them achieve the same result. Let's see what happens at auctions moving forward in 2019. Let's see how the so-called auction results that we get fed in the mainstream media feeds the mainstream week in, week out of the success rates and all this. Let's see how many reporters are out there reporting of what a great day we had at auction. Nobody turned up.
Sure. And it's also worth noting that, so far as I can see, the amount of information with regard to auction settlements and clearances into the new year seems a lot less than it used to be. It seems to be harder now to get good information.
Yeah, in terms of the settlements, in terms of
Yeah,
clearances,
yeah, the number that went to auction, the number that,
yeah, because they've got it takes them a little bit longer to doctor the figures.
Yeah, well, exactly. So I used to be able to get figures on Saturday evening, right, and basically look at those. It seems to me to be the numbers are longer now, and maybe some from different sources, I don't know. But it seems to me that the whole question of how many auctions went, how many were successful, what was the failure rate, I think some of those figures are being suppressed to some extent.
Well, that's part of the job of the mainstream, isn't it? Remember in 2017, the figures came out at 6:30 on the dot. Moving on to 2018, they started coming out around 7:30, 8 o'clock, and towards the end of 2018, you wouldn't see anything for a couple of days.
Yep.
And everything was and now it's going to be interesting as to what happens moving forward, Martin, because as far as I know, REA will very soon, and I mean very, very soon, won't be feeding the information to RP Data. Let's see what RP Data do and how they extract the figures, because most of the figures that they were getting were from REA sources. So now that they've got their own, REA have got their own platform and they've launched their own platform, let's see how RP Data do. I mean, the good thing about RP Data or CoreLogic is that they've stayed neutral. They don't try to push anything other than their than the figures that they report on. But now that they're being sidelined, Domain have got their own platforms and they've got their own agendas. REA have got their own platforms and their own agendas now, and they're going to start. I mean, it's interesting how the so-called internal economists all of a sudden become property experts themselves and telling people where to buy, when to buy, and jump in now, and even so-called experts that have left those platforms with doctorates behind their names or before their names or after their names. One thing for sure is they should go and see a psychiatrist or a doctor themselves. Pushing that buyers should go out and take advantage, or you're going to miss out, Martin. If you don't go out and buy now, you are going to miss out. Seriously, folks. And you don't have to look at what it is that they're selling.
Sure, and of course, the trajectory of home prices is pretty clear, and we think it's going to continue for some time yet. So, the message I have for people at the moment is don't be rushed into anything. The chances are next month and the month after, prices will actually be lower if you're thinking of buying. But then if you are thinking of selling, you've got a different story, because the longer you leave it, the more difficult it could become.
That's right.
Quite complicated.
And my position on that, Martin, I'm calling a 12 to 15% drop in the first 6 months. When we're starting to get inklings of that panic and more listings. The more agents I talk to, the more they tell me how busy they are doing market appraisals. That sooner than later, those listings are going to come on the market. We've seen now whole runs of apartments to offered in one line because of the developers aren't able to sell. More and more Houdini investors, the overseas investors that come in, and now you can't see them. They're long gone. My Houdini investors, they're going and they've gone. And there's no recourse for the developers to go and chase them for any shortfalls other than the 10%. And unfortunately, they're going to get done. Developers are going to get roasted, and they are being roasted. But let's go back to what agents are doing with the vendor paid advertising, Martin. What agents are doing with the marketing and the way they're treating and the misuse of trust accounting. Why is that so? Why is that so concerning to me? It's because the more we enter into this downward trend, the more pressure is on the SMEs, and most real estate agencies, the majority of them would fall into that SME band that I keep on saying that a lot of economists, other than yourself and a couple others, haven't really discussed. They don't want to discuss, and they're the ones that are under a lot of stress. So there are a lot of agencies under a lot of stress, financial stress, and they are tampering with the trust account, and they're using vendor paid advertising or upfront fees that are being taken, in my opinion, somewhat dubiously or illegally, and misusing it, misappropriating it. And watch this space, Martin. I've got very good sources that tell me that big heads in that space are going to roll, and they are going to roll very soon. And I can't disclose, can't give you names and that. All I can say is that the biggest head in the top of the tree is about to roll, and will roll in the next week or 2 weeks, and it's going to make major news. And these are the institutions that have sanctioned all this dubiousness, all this illicitness in our industry.
Right.
Trying to take over the industry, trying to so-called regulate the industry, but all they are is a safe haven for this illegal activity.
Right. So I guess sort of standing back as we come to the end of our conversation, if you're thinking of putting your property on the market and finding an agent, there's a list of questions there that you've gone through, which basically says, don't just jump to the auction, don't just accept the standard 3 months, 90 days, and don't just expect to accept vendor paid advertising as part of the deal, right?
That's correct.
Negotiate hard, hold your real estate agent, whoever that is, to account, and also, I guess, check their credentials and see what they've done recently. So don't take the first person who comes through the door, perhaps, as well. Be a bit more selective.
And also, you can also see who's willing to joint venture with you on this journey. Who's willing to get on the carriage with you and walk with you? Because whilst they've got no commitment to the sale, other than the so-called online profile and the awards they won from the office, it means nothing. Let's see who's going to put their money where the mouth is, especially in these times that we are approaching. And I feel, Martin, that they're the agents that are going to be not only keeping the properties, that they're going to be prepared to work with the vendors not only for just the 60 days, but 90 days, perhaps even 120 days, 150 days, working with the vendor, day in, day out, week in, week out, because they are committed. They're the agents that you want.
Right. Okay. So the fundamental endpoint for this conversation is think of them as in partnership with you, venturing together for a successful outcome, rather than just being a broker that sort of forces a deal at any cost at the price of the vendor.
Exactly right. And I think that would be the points that I would be telling my clients as well. I tell them that day in, day out, and as I instruct them on what to do and assist them on how to achieve the best possible result. Because at the end of the day, they could be losing hundreds of thousands of dollars.
Yep. Very important message there, Edwin. I appreciate your time today. Thank you very much.
Well, anytime, Martin. And, I just do want to have a quick shout out to the Cookie Boy, as always. And also, Little Chook, I did mention you now. So you got to forgive me for not mentioning you last time.
I have to get those in, Edwin. Get those in. Good to talk to you.
Otherwise, they don't leave me alone on Twitter.
Good to talk to you. We'll catch up again soon. Thanks for that.
Good to talk to you always, Martin.
Thanks. Cheers. So there you have it. Some very important advice from Edwin, who really is right on the front line. And I think if you're thinking of putting your property in the market, here's a way to save considerable amounts of money. I'm Martin North from Digital Finance Analytics. Many thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.